just back from Hamburg, the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin. He joins us now from Washington. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us this morning. Lots of tweets from the president this morning. He also said that the sanctions were not discussed in his meeting with President Putin, and that it's time to, quote, move forward constructively with Russia. Does that mean that new sanctions for Russian interference are off the table?
Well, George, first of all, let me just say, I think the trip overall was just an outstanding success. We had over 10 bilats. There were 3 pull-asides. We met with 10 leaders and other leaders at the 3 Seas conference. And as it relates to the meeting with Putin, let me be clear. What started out as a 30-minute meeting lasted over 2 hours. And I think what we should be focused on was that the president handled it brilliantly. Look at what was discussed and what was accomplished. He fully addressed the election situation. He focused on the ceasefire in Syria, which is a major accomplishment. He talked about Ukraine, and he talked about North Korea. So this was a very substantive meeting and on very important issues.
Well, let me get back to the question, though. Are sanctions off the table now?
I'm not going to, well, what I would say is, first of all, we have sanctions that are already on the table, and we expect to enforce those sanctions.
And secondly, you said that the issue of Russian meddling was fully discussed. What we don't know is, does President Trump agree with President Putin? Does he accept President Putin's denials?
Well, George, everybody's focused on that, and what they should be focused on is what was discussed in the substance of the meeting. And let me just say, why would President Trump broadcast exactly what he said in the meeting? Strategically, that makes no sense. What he's broadcast and what he's
already doing that on Twitter this morning. He's just not answering that question.
I got it, why should he answer that question directly? He's made it very clear how he feels. He's made it very clear that he addressed it straight on. And there was significant substance. This is a very important for us to have discussions on substantive issues. And I think the president handled it brilliantly.
You say he's made it very clear how he feels, but we all saw that press conference earlier in the week in Hamburg where the president said about 3 different things on whether or not Russia meddled. He said, I think it was Russia. I think others did it. No one knows for sure. What is the president's position on whether or not Russia interfered in the election? Does he accept the conclusions of the intelligence community?
I think it was very clear what he said. He said those 3 things, and that's what he believes. But again, what's important here is, what is the president doing? This is a president that's focused on action. And this was a foreign trip where we had very, very significant meetings. This was substance. We had over an hour-and-a-half meeting with President Xi and his team, where we focused on trade, economic issues. North Korea, we're following up with a comprehensive economic dialogue with them here in D.C. in July. President Trump is focused on action and getting things done.
So just to be clear, the president does not accept the very clear conclusion of the intelligence community. I want to read it right here. They said, we assessed Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. The president saying no one knows for sure.
Again, what I would say is the president is focused on strategically negotiating with Putin. And we have some very serious issues to deal with, which are Syria, a ceasefire, that's in both of our interests, and having a no-fly zone, dealing with the issues in the Ukraine, which are very important, dealing with North Korea and the ballistic missile. That's what the president is focused on.
The president also said in his tweets this morning that he's setting up a cybersecurity partnership with President Putin. That's already drawn a response from many, including Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who says partnering with Putin on a cybersecurity unit is akin to partnering with Assad on a chemical weapons unit. Your response?
Well, in all due respect, and I think very highly of the senator, but let me just comment on that. I think this is a very important step forward, that what we want to make sure is that we coordinate with Russia, that we're focused on cybersecurity together, that we make sure that they never interfere in any democratic elections or conduct any cybersecurity. And this is like any other strategic alliance, whether we're doing military exercises with our allies or anything else. This is about having capabilities to make sure that we both fight cyber together, which I think is a very significant accomplishment for President Trump.
I know you also believe that the fact that the G20 is now focusing on trade is a win for President Trump as well, including their focus on the trade in steel. President Trump, before this meeting, was closing in on a decision whether to impose tariffs and quotas on imported steel. The president of the European Commission has vowed retaliation if he does that. Are you worried that that kind of decision from President Trump could spark a trade war?
No, I'm not worried at all. Quite the contrary. We had very substantive conversations on steel, especially with the Chinese delegation. We're making very good progress with them. And I think that the threat of different actions in trade sanctions and other things is what led to very proactive discussions with all of our counterparts. And what we're trying to do is negotiate agreements with them. And I think we're making very good progress on that. And if we can't get the agreements that President Trump wants, then we'll take action on trade.
It had been reported the president was just days or weeks away from reaching this decision on steel tariffs or steel quotas. Is he now going to put off that decision until the G20 have a chance to examine it?
Again, I think President Trump's made it very clear he's not going to broadcast all his strategies, so that when we're negotiating kind of with all of our counterparts we're doing, we're not going to broadcast on TV what our strategy is exactly when we're taking actions. What I can tell you is we had very substantive discussions, and we think we're going to move forward. And let me tell you, we made major progress from my first G20 finance ministers meeting where we discussed trade and it was 19-1. We had almost a complete consensus on trade at this G20 leaders meeting, where if you look in the communique, we have language around reciprocal trade and the importance of reciprocal trade and anti-dumping. In almost every single bilat we were in, the president talked about trade. And what we're looking for is free and fair trade. And we're looking to make sure that we can grow our exports so that we don't have a giant trade imbalance.
Let's talk about Mexico. You were in the bilateral meeting with the Mexican president that President Trump was in. And right before that meeting, the president was asked if he still thinks Mexico should pay for the wall. I want to show that.
Trump, do you still want Mexico to pay for the wall?
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
So the president said absolutely in front of the cameras. Did he raise that issue with the Mexican president in the meeting? There was nothing about it in the joint readout of the meeting.
Again, the substantive portion of the meeting was really talking about NAFTA. That's the major issue. We also talked about immigration, where we've made enormous progress with them on combating illegal immigration, which is a very important issue. I think, we have a 90-day period where we can't negotiate on NAFTA, but we can talk about principles. We're moving forward very proactively. We've had discussions with them and the Canadians. And I think we're looking forward to renegotiating NAFTA. And that's the significant accomplishment. As it relates to the wall, I'm confident we'll figure out the wall. And whether we do a solar wall that we can sell electricity, or whether we do an electronic wall or a traditional wall, we're going to move forward with the wall.
But Mexico's not going to pay for it, are they?
I didn't say that. The president has said that he expects that it'll be paid for, and we'll deal with that at the right time.
But you say that, but the president apparently didn't bring it up with the Mexican president. I spoke with Secretary of State Tillerson about a month back, and he said he didn't bring it up in his meeting with the Mexican foreign minister. Isn't it time to concede that Mexico is not going to pay for that wall, and you're not going to be able to renegotiate NAFTA if you insist on Mexico paying for the wall?
Again, what I would say is that's not the focus for the moment. The focus is NAFTA. I think, again, we have a very good relationship with the Mexican government and with the president. And I think we're moving very proactively to a solution. And again, the two priorities at the moment are immigration, where we've already made substantial progress, and NAFTA. And again, let me tell you, I sat in every single meeting other than the Russian meeting. These were substantive meetings. And whether it was Chancellor Merkel, whether it was Prime Minister Theresa May, whether it was the trilat we had with Japan and the Republic of Korea, these were substantive discussions on economics, national security, Korea. President Trump is all about action. And this was just, we had lots and lots of meetings with lots of discussion on important issues.
So bottom line, immigration and NAFTA renegotiation are priorities. Paying for the wall is not. I want to move on to tax reform. Now, I know you're in the middle of that as well in the meetings with Speaker Ryan and others. When will the plan be ready? And is it still your goal that the wealthy will not receive a net tax cut?
So let me just say we're absolutely committed to getting tax reform done this year. I think it's critical for economic growth. I think, as you've heard us say, we need to get back to 3% or better GDP. And our plan is to have a full-blown release of the plan in the beginning of September, with being able to vote and getting this passed before the end of the year. And we are having meetings multiple times every week with the leadership of the House and the Senate. We're having lots of listening sessions. We probably met with 300 or 400 different business leaders, outsiders, think tanks. We're learning from the healthcare process, and we're going to get tax reform done this week.
The website this year,
this
not
year,
this week, right?
this year,
right.
excuse me.
The website Axios reported that Steve Bannon in the White House is advocating a 40% top tax rate. He wants a 4 in front of it, maybe even higher than 40%. Is that idea actually on the table?
No, it's not. I have never heard Steve mention that. It's another example of a false leak that's being reported. I think it's very clear, we have a proposal out there that the administration has put out with a top rate of 35%, where we reduce and eliminate almost every single deduction. So that means that people who are in the high tax states will have no tax reduction, and it'll be offset by reduced deductions. And that's the current plan.
That seems to be a slight change in your position. Before you were saying that none of the wealthy would get a net tax cut. Now you're only saying the wealthy in the high tax states will not get a net tax cut.
Again, let me just say that the plan hasn't been finalized. And I think, again, for most people, they have lots of deductions. I think we've heard a lot of feedback from New York, California, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois. And I think we want to be sensitive to those states and those economies as we shape the plan. But again, the president's focus is a middle-income tax cut, reforming the business tax system to make it competitive, and creating a tax simplification that will grow this economy.
No one in the middle class will have a tax increase?
That's our objective, absolutely.
And also the big question of whether this is going to be tax reform or a tax cut. Is it going to be revenue neutral? Under the current budget rules, any tax reform would have to pay for itself over 10 years or be revenue neutral. Will your plan meet that standard, or are you considering something that would increase the deficit over that time frame of 10 years?
Well, let me just be clear. First of all, we're finalizing the details of the plan. So there's certain issues that are still on the table. But I will say this will be tax reform and tax cuts. And we expect that the plan will be fully paid for. Now, one of the issues that I've talked about, again, what I've talked about before is there are different projections. And with our projections, you create over $2 trillion of additional revenues. So it will be paid for over 10 years. The question is whether we'll get credit for all of that under the current models of the Joint Tax Commission. And again, that's one of the things that's under negotiations that we're discussing right now with leadership.
You've got a lot on your plate, including raising the debt limit. The chairman of the House Freedom Caucus and those in the House conservatives are insisting that any debt ceiling increase has to be paired with spending reforms and cuts that move the budget towards balance. Is that something you're considering?
Well, again, let me just say on the debt limit, I've said this before, I'm all for controlling spending. And I think that Congress has the absolute right to control spending, and we should be focused on that, particularly given the size of the national debt. Having said that, when we've already committed to pay for things, we have to honor those commitments. And the debt limit is about paying for things that we've already committed to. It's different than the budget process. So one of the things I think over time is we need to change this debt limit process so that we're focused on controlling expenses, but then when we've committed for them, it's clear we're going to pay for them. And the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and the United States is the best credit in the world, and we're going to keep it that way.
So it sounds like you want a clean debt limit. I want to do a final question on health care. You know the Senate is considering their repeal plans. It looks like it's having some trouble right now, and the president, just before the break, tweeted out that if Republican senators are unable to pass what they're working on now, they should immediately repeal and then replace at a later date. Is that the fallback position?
What I would say is that the president's first priority is for the Senate, the House, to pass the plan. And I know you have Senator Ted Cruz on right after me, and I'm very hopeful that his plan and his changes will get supported. And I think we'd like to get health care done. If we don't get this passed, then the president, as he said, will go to the next plan.
Secretary Mnuchin, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.